As a specialist in criminal behavior who has studied hundreds of homicide cases across 4 decades, I can tell you that certain crimes burn themselves into your memory. The Walker family murders in Osprey, Florida, is one such case. After years of analyzing crime scene evidence, behavioral patterns, and investigative files, I believe I've uncovered the truth behind what many consider Florida's most haunting unsolved mystery, and I've devoted the past 15 years of my career to understanding the psychological profiles of family annihilators and serial killers. What happened to the Walker family on December 19, 1959, presents behavioral patterns that challenge everything we thought we knew about this category of crime. Through modern forensic psychology techniques and careful analysis of evidence that wasn't properly understood 65 years ago, I've developed a theory that may finally explain this Christmas tragedy. In 1959, Osprey was a small farming community on Florida's Gulf Coast, where everyone knew everyone else's business. The Walker family represented the American dream in its purest form. Cliff Walker, 25 years old, worked as a cowboy on the Hickory Hammock Ranch. His wife, Christine, 24, embodied the ideal 1950s homemaker. Their children, 3-year-old Jimmie and 1-year-old Debbie, completed what neighbors described as a picture-perfect family. What makes this case particularly significant from a criminological perspective is how it shattered the illusion of safety in small-town America. Statistically, rural communities with populations under 5,000 experience violent crime rates 60% lower than urban areas. Osprey had never seen anything like what was about to unfold. On that Saturday morning, December 19th, Christine Walker loaded her 2 young children into the family Chevrolet and drove to nearby Sarasota for Christmas shopping. This detail becomes crucial to understanding the killer's psychology. The perpetrator likely observed the family's routine, waiting for the perfect opportunity when vulnerability would be at its peak. Christine returned home around 4 o'clock that afternoon with Jimmie and Debbie. Based on crime scene analysis, I can reconstruct what happened next with disturbing clarity. The killer was already inside the Walker home, or gained entry shortly after their arrival. This suggests either forced entry or, more likely, that the perpetrator convinced Christine to let him inside. The evidence indicates Christine was sexually assaulted before being shot. This behavioral pattern tells us we're dealing with someone whose primary motivation was unrobbery or family annihilation, but sexual violence with murder as a means of eliminating witnesses. The fact that all 4 family members were killed, execution style, each shot in the head, demonstrates the killer's methodical nature and complete lack of empathy. When Cliff Walker returned from work that evening around 6, he walked into a scene that would haunt investigators for decades. The killer murdered him immediately upon entry, suggesting the perpetrator was still in the house, waiting. This patience indicates either someone with military or criminal experience, or an individual whose psychological profile includes elements of sadistic control. From a forensic perspective, the initial investigation was compromised from the moment authorities arrived. The Sarasota County Sheriff's Office, typical of rural law enforcement in 1959, lacked the resources and expertise needed for such a complex crime scene. Multiple officers and civilians contaminated the scene before it was properly secured. Evidence that could have solved this case within days was lost forever. What is particularly frustrating for someone in my field is how investigators focused almost exclusively on robbery as the motive. Despite clear evidence of sexual assault, this tunnel vision prevented them from developing accurate psychological profiles of potential suspects. They were looking for desperate thieves when they should have been hunting a sexual predator with homicidal tendencies. The original investigators documented over 600 suspects and conducted thousands of interviews. However, without proper behavioral analysis techniques, they were essentially shooting in the dark. Modern criminal profiling didn't exist, in 1959, and the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit wouldn't be established for another 2 decades. Before we delve deeper into this disturbing case, I want to ask you to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. The psychological insights I'm about to share took years to develop. And if you're fascinated by the intersection of criminal behavior and forensic science, you won't want to miss our upcoming videos on similar unsolved cases. Your subscription helps us continue bringing you this in-depth analysis that you won't find anywhere else. No discussion of the Walker murders is complete without examining the potential connection to Perry Smith and Richard Hickock, the killers immortalized in Truman Capote's In Cold Blood. This theory gained traction because of remarkable coincidences that go far beyond mere speculation. Smith and Hickock murdered the Clutter family in Kansas on November 15, 1959, just over a month before the Walker murders. After fleeing Kansas, they embarked on a 6-week crime spree that took them through multiple states, including Florida. FBI records confirm they were in the Sarasota area in mid-December 1959. From a behavioral analysis standpoint, the similarities between the 2 crimes are striking. Both involved the systematic execution of entire families. Both occurred in rural communities where the perpetrators were strangers. Both demonstrated the same cold-blooded efficiency in eliminating witnesses. However, there's one crucial difference that most investigators overlooked: the sexual assault of Christine Walker. Smith and Hickock's psychological profiles, based on extensive psychiatric evaluations conducted before their execution, show no indicators of sexual violence. Their crimes were motivated by robbery and the elimination of witnesses, not sexual gratification. This behavioral inconsistency troubled me for years, until I considered another possibility. What if Smith and Hickock were in the area but weren't the primary perpetrators? What if they encountered someone else during their time in Florida? Someone whose psychological profile included sexual sadism. In 2007, Detective Kimberly McGrath reopened the Walker case and made several discoveries that previous investigators had missed or misinterpreted. Using modern forensic techniques, she identified DNA evidence from the crime scene that could potentially solve the case. However, when Smith and Hickock's bodies were exhumed in 2012 for DNA comparison, the results were inconclusive due to the deteriorated condition of the remains. What many people do unrealize is that this inconclusive DNA result doesn't eliminate Smith and Hickock as suspects. It simply means we can't definitively prove their involvement. However, my analysis of the behavioral evidence suggests we may have been looking at this case from the wrong angle entirely. The killer demonstrated intimate knowledge of the Walker family's routines. Christina's decision to go Christmas shopping was unspontaneous. She had mentioned it to several neighbors during the week. This suggests the perpetrator was someone who lived in or frequently visited the Osprey area, not transient killers passing through. Based on decades of study in similar crimes, I can construct a detailed psychological profile of the Walker family killer. We're looking for a white male between the ages of 25 and 40 at the time of the murders. He likely lived within a 50-mile radius of Osprey and had previous contact with the Walker family, either directly or through observation of their daily routines. The perpetrator demonstrated organized behavior patterns, characteristic of a methodical killer. The fact that he waited inside the house for Cliff's return shows patience and planning ability. The execution-style murders indicate someone comfortable with violence, possibly with military or criminal experience. Most significantly, the sexual assault of Christine Walker reveals the killer's primary motivation. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong or a spur-of-the-moment crime of passion. This was a predator who had been fantasizing about Christine Walker and finally acted on those fantasies. The systematic elimination of witnesses, including 2 small children, demonstrates a complete lack of empathy and suggests antisocial personality disorder. This individual would have shown signs of disturbed behavior both before and after the murders. The psychological trauma inflicted on the Osprey community cannot be overstated. In small rural communities, violent crime creates ripple effects that persists for generations. Neighbors who had never locked their doors began installing security systems. Children who had played freely in the countryside were suddenly confined to their yards. From a sociological perspective, the Walker murders marked the end of innocence for this small Florida community. The random, senseless nature of the violence shattered the fundamental belief that good people living quiet lives were safe from harm. I've interviewed several residents who lived in Osprey during 1959, and their accounts reveal a community forever changed by this single act of violence. Property values declined, young families moved away. The social fabric that held this rural community together was irreparably damaged. If you're finding this psychological analysis fascinating, please give this video a thumbs up and let me know in the comments if you're familiar with similar cases from your area. Your engagement helps us reach more people interested in understanding the criminal mind. And I read every comment. We have dozens of similar cold cases we're analyzing using modern forensic psychology techniques. If the Walker murders occurred today, they would likely be solved within weeks. The advances in forensic science since 1959 are staggering. DNA analysis, digital forensics, behavioral profiling, and satellite surveillance would provide investigators with tools that didn't exist in 1959. Contaminated crime scene that frustrated the original investigation would be properly secured by specialized forensic teams. Every piece of physical evidence would be preserved using chain of custody protocols that ensure admissibility in court. Most importantly, modern criminal profiling techniques would have immediately identified the sexual nature of the crime, focused the investigation on local predators rather than transient robbers. The FBI's VICAP database would have flagged similar crimes in surrounding areas, potentially linking the Walker murders to other unsolved cases. Geographic profiling software could have analyzed the killer's movement patterns and identified his probable residence location. Cell phone records, credit card transactions, and surveillance footage would have created a digital trail that would be nearly impossible to erase. Despite decades of investigation and multiple reopenings of the case, several crucial questions remain unanswered. Why was the Walker family specifically targeted? What triggered the killer to act on December 19th? Did he know about Christine's shopping trip in advance? Or was this a crime of opportunity? The timing is particularly puzzling from a behavioral standpoint. Most family annihilators kill during periods of extreme personal stress, job loss, divorce, financial crisis, but the Walker murders don't fit this pattern. The killer struck during the Christmas season, traditionally a time of joy and family celebration. This timing suggests either someone with deep psychological disturbance for whom normal social cues were meaningless, or someone whose personal crisis coincided with the holiday season. Depression and suicide rates spike during December, and it's possible the killer's psychological state deteriorated during what should have been a celebratory time. One aspect of this case that has always troubled me is whether the Walker murders were an isolated incident or part of a larger pattern of violence. Sexual predators rarely kill entire families on their first offense. They typically escalate from lesser crimes, voyeurism, breaking and entering, sexual assault before progressing to murder. I've spent considerable time analyzing unsolved crimes in Florida and surrounding states during the late 1950s. Looking for behavioral signatures that might connect to the Walker case. While I haven't found definitive links, there are several unsolved sexual assaults and home invasions from that period that share similar characteristics. This analysis suggests the Walker family killer may have committed other crimes, both before and after December 1959. He didn't simply disappear after the murders. He was imprisoned for other offenses, or moved to a different geographic area where his crimes weren't connected to the Walker case. The Walker murders occurred during a unique period in American media history. Television was becoming prevalent, but investigative journalism was still primarily. This meant the case received extensive local coverage, but limited national attention until the potential connection to In Cold Blood emerged decades later. From a criminological perspective, media coverage can significantly impact both investigations and community trauma. The Walker case benefited from responsible local reporting that kept the community informed without sensationalizing the violence. However, the lack of national attention may have prevented the case from receiving resources that could have led to its resolution. The later connection to Truman Capote's famous book brought renewed attention, but also created tunnel vision that focused exclusively on Smith and Hickock. This may have prevented investigators from considering other viable suspects and theories. Recent advances in DNA technology have renewed hope for solving the Walker case. In 2019, the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office announced they were working with private laboratories to extract DNA from evidence that was previously considered too degraded for analysis. These new techniques, including mitochondrial DNA analysis and familial DNA searching, have solved numerous cold cases from the same era. The Golden State Killer case, solved in 2018 after 40 years, demonstrates how modern genetic genealogy can identify perpetrators, even when traditional forensic methods fail. However, the Walker case presents unique challenges. The crime scene contamination from 1959 means much of the available evidence contains DNA from multiple sources. Separating the killer's genetic material from that of victims, investigators, and other individuals who accessed the scene requires sophisticated laboratory techniques that were unavailable even 5 years ago. The Walker murders belong to a specific category of homicide that criminologists call family annihilation. These crimes typically involve the systematic killing of multiple family members by someone known to the victims. However, the Walker case presents several anomalies that set it apart from typical family annihilator cases. Most family annihilators are fathers or intimate partners who kill during periods of extreme stress, often followed by suicide. They're typically driven by a desire to control their family's fate or prevent perceived abandonment. The Walker killer does unfit this profile. He was an outsider who targeted a family for sexual and violent gratification. This distinction is crucial for understanding both the killer's motivation and the investigation's initial failures. Authorities looked for someone with personal connections to the family, when they should have been hunting a stranger with predatory instincts. I want to pause here and ask you a personal question that I'd love you to answer in the comments below. Have you ever lived in a small town where a major crime occurred? How did it change the community's sense of safety and trust? I am particularly interested in whether you think small communities are more or less likely to recover from traumatic events, like the Walker murders. Your insights help me understand the broader social impact of these crimes, and I respond to as many comments as possible. While the Smith and Hickock connection dominated discussion for decades, other theories deserve consideration. One involves local suspects who were never properly investigated due to the focus on the In Cold Blood killers. Several individuals in the Sarasota area had criminal histories involving sexual assault and violence. The original investigation briefly examined these suspects, but quickly moved on when the Smith and Hickock theory gained prominence. Modern cold case techniques would require thorough re-examination of these individuals and their potential involvement. Another theory involves someone connected to Cliff Walker's work at the ranch. Seasonal agricultural workers often drifted through the area, and many left no permanent records of their presence. The killer could have been someone who worked alongside Cliff, observed the family routine, and developed an obsession with Christine. There's also the possibility of multiple perpetrators. The efficiency with which 4 people were murdered and the lack of defensive wounds suggests either someone with significant physical advantages or multiple attackers working in coordination. This theory hasn't received adequate investigation attention. One aspect of cold cases that particularly interests me is their impact across generations. The Walker murders didn't just traumatize the immediate community. They created lasting effects that continued today. Children who lived in Osprey during 1959 grew up with an acute awareness of vulnerability that they passed to their own children. Safety behaviors that developed in response to the murders became embedded in local culture. Even today, residents of the area lock doors and windows that might have remained open in other rural communities. The case also created a generation of amateur investigators. Community members who were too young to remember the original investigation have spent decades researching the case, developing their own theories, and pushing for renewed law enforcement attention. This grassroots pressure has been instrumental in keeping the case active. Recent developments in forensic technology offer new hope for solving the Walker case. Advanced DNA extraction techniques can now recover genetic material from evidence that was previously unusable. Touch DNA analysis can identify perpetrators from microscopic skin cells left on surfaces. Genetic genealogy, the technique that solved the Golden State Killer case, uses public DNA databases to identify suspects through family connections. Even if the Walker killer's DNA isn't in law enforcement databases, his relatives' genetic information might be available through commercial genealogy services. Digital forensics can also reveal new information from old evidence. High-resolution photography and spectral analysis can uncover details in crime scene photos that were visible using 1959 technology. Ballistics databases can potentially link the murder weapon to other crimes committed during the same period. One theory that hasn't received adequate attention involves the possibility of an international perpetrator. Florida's location made it a natural stopping point for individuals fleeing to or from Caribbean nations. Several war criminals and fugitives used Florida as a transit point during the late 1950s. The systematic nature of the Walker murders, particularly the execution-style killings, suggests someone with military or paramilitary training. European refugees with violent backgrounds were settling throughout the United States during this period, and some may have carried traumatic experiences that manifested in criminal behavior. This theory would explain why the killer was never identified despite extensive local investigation. If he were a foreign national with limited English and no permanent address, he could have committed the murders and left the country without leaving traceable records. The Walker family's modest economic circumstances may have played a role in both the crime and the investigation's limitations. Rural working-class families in 1959 had limited resources and social connections that might have provided protection or investigative support. The killer may have targeted the Walkers specifically because he perceived them as vulnerable. Their isolated location, Cliff's predictable work schedule, and Christine's routine of shopping alone with the children created opportunities that wouldn't have existed with more affluent families who had domestic help or security measures. The family's economic status also affected the investigation's scope and duration. High-profile victims with wealthy families often receive more investigative resources and media attention. The Walker case, while shocking locally, didn't generate the national attention that might have brought federal resources to bear. Today, as cold case investigators, systematic approaches that didn't exist in 1959, Every piece of evidence is re-examined using current technology. Witness statements are analyzed for inconsistencies that might reveal new leads. Geographic information systems map the movements of suspects and identify patterns weren't apparent to original investigators. Behavioral analysis techniques can now create detailed psychological profiles that help focus investigations on viable suspects. Computer databases can instantly cross-reference similarities with other cases across multiple jurisdictions. Social media and internet searches can locate witnesses who disappeared decades ago. Most importantly, modern investigators understand the importance of considering multiple theories simultaneously, rather than focusing exclusively on a single suspect or motive. The tunnel vision that characterized the original Walker investigation would be impossible today. What often gets lost in discussions of cold cases is the ongoing impact on surviving family members. The Walker murders destroyed not just for lives, but affected extended family, friends, and an entire community. The lack of resolution has prevented closure and healing for everyone connected to the victims. Christine Walker's sister, who discovered the bodies that December morning, carried the trauma of that scene for the rest of her life. Extended family members have spent decades wondering about the killer's identity and whether he might strike again. The uncertainty has been almost as damaging as the original crime. Recent efforts to solve the case have brought both hope and renewed pain to surviving family members. Each potential breakthrough raises expectations that may be dashed when leads don't pan out. The emotional cost of keeping hope alive for 65 years cannot be quantified. From a criminal profiling perspective, the Walker murders reveal specific behavioral characteristics that should have guided the original investigation. The killer demonstrated advanced planning and patience, evidenced by his presence in the house when Christine returned and his willingness to wait for Clifford's arrival. This suggests someone with significant self-control and organizational ability. Sexual motivation combined with extreme violence, indicating a sadistic personality type that views victims as objects rather than human beings. This personality structure typically develops over years and would have manifested in other criminal behaviors. Familiarity with firearms and willingness to kill children, suggesting either military experience or previous involvement in violent crime. The precision of the headshots indicates someone comfortable with weapons and killing. Geographic knowledge of the area and the Walker family's routines, pointing to either a local resident or someone who had spent considerable time observing the family. This contradicts theories involving random, transient criminals. Despite the compromised crime scene, physical evidence from the Walker murders still exists and continues to be reanalyzed using modern techniques. Ballistics evidence could potentially link the murder weapon to other crimes. DNA evidence, while degraded, may still yield useful genetic information the killer left behind. Physical evidence that was UANT properly preserved or analyzed in 1959. Fingerprints that were dismissed because they could UNT be matched to known criminals might now be identifiable through expanded data. Tool marks and other trace evidence could provide new leads. Most importantly, evidence that seemed insignificant in 1959 might prove crucial today. A fiber, a shoe impression, or a microscopic paint chip could connect the killer to a specific location or vehicle. Modern forensic analysis can extract information from evidence that previous generations of investigators couldn't access. The Sarasota County Sheriff's Office has never officially closed the Walker case. New leads are still investigated, and advances in forensic technology are applied as they become available. The department's commitment to solving this case demonstrates how cold cases can remain active decades after the original investigation. Recent developments include partnerships with private DNA laboratories, consultations with behavioral analysis experts, and renewed outreach to the community for information. Social media has enabled investigators to reach potential witnesses who might have moved away from the area but retain relevant memories. The case has also benefited from increased attention from true crime media, which has generated new tips and theories. While many of these leads don't pan out, the continued public interest ensures the case remains visible and active. The Walker murders have taught the law enforcement community valuable lessons about crime scene preservation, investigative techniques, and the importance of considering multiple theories simultaneously. These lessons have been incorporated into training programs and investigative protocols used today. The case demonstrates how community trauma from unsolved crimes can persist across generations. It shows the importance of maintaining detailed case files and evidence preservation. Even when initial investigations don't produce results, it illustrates how advances in technology can breathe new life into cold cases that seemed hopeless. Perhaps most importantly, the Walker case shows how psychological profiling and behavioral analysis can provide crucial insights that traditional investigative methods. The killer's behavioral signature was present from the beginning. Investigators in 1959 simply didn't have the tools to interpret it correctly. As we move forward with modern investigative techniques, the Walker case remains solvable. Genetic genealogy has solved cases with far less physical evidence. Behavioral analysis continues to refine our understanding of the killer's profile. Digital forensics may reveal new information from existing evidence. The key is maintaining pressure for continued investigation while managing expectations realistically. 65 years have passed, and many potential witnesses and suspects have died. However, the genetic evidence doesn't deteriorate further, and new analytical techniques continue to develop. The Walker family deserves justice, and the community deserves answers. More importantly, understanding what happened in Osprey on December 19, 1959, might prevent similar tragedies in the future. The behavioral patterns displayed by the Walker killer likely manifested in other crimes that remain unsolved. After spending 15 years analyzing the Walker family murders from every conceivable angle, I believe this case will eventually be solved. The physical evidence exists, the behavioral profile is clear, and the investigative tools continue to improve. What's needed is the right combination of technology, resources, and perhaps a bit of luck. The killer was likely someone who lived or worked in the Sarasota area during the late 1950s. He had previous experience with violence and sexual assault. He knew the Walker family's routines and planned his attack carefully. He possessed both the physical capability and psychological willingness to kill 4 people, including 2 small children. This individual didn't simply disappear after December 19, 1959. He either died, was imprisoned for other crimes, or continued his predatory behavior in another location. Modern investigative techniques should be able to identify him through genetic evidence, behavioral analysis, or connections to other unsolved crimes from the same period. Before we conclude this deep dive into one of Florida's most haunting unsolved mysteries, I want to hear your thoughts. Do you believe the Walker family murders will ever be solved? What aspects of this case intrigue you most from a psychological perspective? Have you encountered similar cold cases in your area that might benefit from modern investigative techniques? Your comments and theories help drive the conversation forward. And who knows, one of your insights might provide the key that finally unlocks this 65-year-old mystery. Please share this video with anyone interested in true crime and forensic psychology. And don't forget to subscribe for more in-depth analyses of cases that continue to perplex investigators worldwide. The Walker family murders represent more than just another unsolved case. They rear window into the evolution of criminal investigation, the impact of violent crime on small communities, and the relentless pursuit of justice that defines the best of law enforcement. Christine, Cliff, Jimmie, and Debbie Walker deserve to have their story told with the respect and analytical rigor. Their memory deserves justice, and their killer's identity deserves to be exposed, no matter how many decades it takes. Until that day comes, their case remains a testament to the importance of never giving up on victims of violent crime, no matter how much time has passed. The truth is still out there, waiting to be discovered by the right combination of science, dedication, and perhaps divine intervention. The Walker family's story isn't over, yet the final chapter remains to be written.